The sun hung low over the Cascade Range in Oregon, casting long shadows across the dense evergreen forest. It was late August 2008, and the trails were still busy with the last wave of summer hikers. Among them were Jake Holloway, 28, and his girlfriend Emma Rodriguez, 26, a couple from Portland who'd been dating for 3 years. They'd told Emma's sister they were heading to a remote campsite near the Washington border, a 4-day trip to celebrate Emma's new job at a graphic design firm. They never came home. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Your support keeps these stories alive. Emma's sister, Nicole, was the first to sound the alarm. When Emma didn't show up for her first day of work on September 2nd, Nicole drove to their apartment. The door was locked, their cat unfed, mail piling up. She called Jake's parents in Bend. They hadn't heard from him either. Within hours, Nicole was at the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, filing a missing persons report. The deputy who took her statement was sympathetic but cautious. "Adults go off-grid sometimes," he explained. "They might have extended their trip, but Nicole knew better. Emma was meticulous, almost obsessive about plans. She wouldn't miss her first day without calling, and Jake, despite his laid-back demeanor, was responsible. He'd worked as a paramedic for 5 years. He understood emergencies. The search began on September 4th. Sheriff's deputies, along with volunteers from the local search and rescue team, combed the trails Emma and Jake had mentioned. They started at the trailhead near Mount Hood, where Jake's blue Subaru Outback was found in the parking lot, covered in a week's worth of pine needles and dust. Inside, they found nothing unusual. Camping gear was gone, but their phones, wallets, and a handwritten itinerary were locked in the glove compartment. The itinerary listed 3 potential campsites, all within a 10-mile radius. For 2 weeks, teams searched. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Cadaver dogs sniffed through underbrush. Divers checked nearby lakes and streams. They found nothing, no tent, no backpacks, no trace of the couple. It was as if Jake and Emma had simply evaporated into the forest. Nicole refused to give up. She printed flyers, organized candlelight vigils, appeared on local news stations. Emma's face, framed by dark curls and a bright smile, became familiar across the Pacific Northwest. Tips poured in. Someone thought they'd seen them at a gas station in Stevenson. Another claimed they'd spotted them hitchhiking near the Columbia River Gorge. Every lead went nowhere. By October, the official search was called off. Resources were limited, the sheriff explained to Nicole. They'd done everything they could. The case went cold, filed away with hundreds of others. Years passed. Nicole graduated from college, got married, had 2 children. But she never stopped thinking about her sister. Every August, she'd drive to that trailhead, leave flowers and walk the trails, hoping. Jake's parents, Richard and Linda, dealt with their grief differently. They sold their house in Bend and moved to Arizona, unable to bear the memories. Emma's mother, Carla, fell into a deep depression that lasted years. The not knowing was the worst part. She'd tell anyone who'd listen. If they were dead, at least there'd be closure. But this limbo was torture. In 2015, a hiker found a weathered backpack near a creek 15 miles from where Jake and Emma had parked. Inside were soggy clothes, a water bottle, and a journal. The handwriting didn't match either of theirs. Another dead end. The case became a ghost story among local hikers. Some claimed the forest had swallowed them, that the mountains were unforgiving to those who ventured too deep. Others speculated about foul play. Maybe they'd encountered someone dangerous on the trail, but without evidence, it was all speculation. By 2023, 15 years had passed. Nicole was 41, a mother of 3, working as a nurse in Portland. She still visited the trailhead every year, still left flowers, but the hope had dimmed to a faint flicker. She'd accepted, in a way, that she might never know what happened. Her children knew about Aunt Emma, the woman in the photographs who disappeared into the woods, but to them, she was more myth than memory. Then, in July 2023, everything changed. A YouTuber named Marcus Thompson, who ran a channel called Pacific Northwest Mysteries, decided to feature Jake and Emma's case. Marcus, 34, had built a following of over 2 million subscribers by exploring abandoned places and unsolved disappearances across Washington and Oregon. He was thorough, respectful, and had a knack for storytelling that kept viewers engaged. Marcus had been fascinated by the Holloway Rodriguez case since reading about it in college. He'd grown up in Eugene, spent his childhood camping in these same forests. The idea that two people could vanish without a trace haunted him. For his video, he planned to retrace their steps, interview family members, and use his drone to survey areas that ground searches might have missed. He reached out to Nicole through Facebook. She was hesitant at first. Over the years, she'd dealt with plenty of true crime enthusiasts, some respectful, others exploitative. But Marcus was different. He listened. He cared. When they met at a coffee shop in Portland, he showed her his research, maps, timelines, witness statements he'd tracked down. He wasn't just chasing views. He genuinely wanted answers. Nicole agreed to appear in the video. So did Carla, Emma's mother, now 68 and living in a care facility. Richard and Linda declined, still too broken to revisit the past. Jake's younger brother Tyler, who'd been 16 when Jake disappeared, agreed to an interview. He was a firefighter now, living in Seattle with his wife and daughter. He'd named his daughter Emma. Marcus spent weeks preparing. He studied topographical maps, consulted with former search and rescue coordinators, and interviewed locals who remembered the case. One detail kept nagging at him. The original search had focused on the 3 campsites listed in Jake and Emma's itinerary. But what if they'd deviated from their plan? What if they'd found a spot not marked on any map? In late August 2023, Marcus drove to the trailhead. He brought his drone, a high-resolution camera capable of thermal imaging, and enough supplies for several days. His plan was to survey areas beyond the original search radius, particularly the dense forest to the northwest, where terrain was too rugged for easy ground access. On his 3rd day, Marcus launched his drone from a ridge overlooking a narrow canyon. The footage on his monitor showed miles of unbroken forest, rocky outcroppings, and a small, partially frozen lake fed by snowmelt. He was about to recall the drone when something caught his eye, a geometric shape near the lake's southern shore, partially obscured by overgrown vegetation. It was too regular to be natural. Marcus's heart pounded. He marked the coordinates, packed up his gear, and began the 2-hour hike down into the canyon. The terrain was brutal, steep slopes, thick brush, loose rocks. He understood now why searchers hadn't ventured this far. It was nearly inaccessible, especially for ground teams working quickly. When he reached the lake, the sun was setting, casting the water in shades of amber and crimson. He pushed through the undergrowth toward the coordinates, his breath coming in short bursts. And then he saw it. A tent, faded blue, torn in places, partially collapsed. Beside it, 2 backpacks leaned against a fallen log, covered in moss and decay. Marcus's hands trembled as he pulled out his camera. He didn't touch anything, he knew better, but he documented everything. The tent, the backpacks, and then a few feet away, partially covered by leaves and soil, something that made his stomach drop. Human remains. 2 sets, lying close together, as if they'd fallen asleep side by side. Marcus immediately called 911. Within hours, sheriff's deputies and forensics teams were at the scene. Nicole got the call the next morning. She collapsed in her kitchen, her husband catching her before she hit the floor. The remains were confirmed through dental records: Jake Holloway and Emma Rodriguez. After 15 years, they'd been found. The investigation revealed what had happened. Jake and Emma had indeed deviated from their planned route. Drawn by a local's recommendation of a secluded lake, the same lake Marcus had found. They'd set up camp, but the weather had turned unexpectedly. A late summer storm had rolled in, dropping temperatures and bringing heavy rain. The tent showed signs of hypothermia. They'd likely died in their sleep, huddled together for warmth. Their bodies, remote and undiscovered, had slowly been reclaimed by the forest. There was no foul play, no dramatic mystery, just nature's harsh indifference. They'd gotten lost, gone too far, and paid the ultimate price. Nicole stood at their graveside in October 2023, finally able to say goodbye. Carla was there, holding her hand. Tyler stood nearby, his daughter Emma balanced on his hip. Marcus attended too, staying in the back, respectful of the family's grief. The video Marcus posted, titled "Solved: The 2008 Cascade Disappearance," became his most viewed, with over 15 million views. But he didn't monetize it. Instead, he directed all donations to a fund for search and rescue organizations, because he understood now, more than ever, how quickly the wilderness can turn deadly and how desperately families need closure. Nicole would later tell reporters that while the pain of losing Emma never fully healed, knowing what happened brought a kind of peace she'd never thought possible. The not knowing had been its own kind of death. Now finally she could let her sister rest. The funeral was held on a crisp October morning in Portland, at the same church where Emma's grandmother had been laid to rest a decade earlier. The sanctuary was filled beyond capacity. Friends from high school, colleagues from the design firm where Emma had been set to work, paramedics who'd served alongside Jake, and dozens of strangers who'd followed the case over the years. Nicole had prepared a eulogy, but when she stood at the podium, the words caught in her throat. She looked down at the two closed caskets, adorned with wildflowers from the Cascade forests, and simply said, "Welcome home." After the service, Tyler approached Marcus in the parking lot. The two men hadn't spoken much beyond their initial interview, but Tyler felt compelled to say something. He extended his hand, gripping Marcus's firmly. "You gave us what 15 years of searching couldn't," Tyler said, his voice thick. "My parents didn't live to see this day. Dad passed in 2019, Mom 2 years later. But they died hoping. You turned that hope into truth. Thank you." Marcus nodded, unable to find adequate words. He'd documented dozens of unsolved cases, but this was the first he'd actually helped solve. The weight of it sat heavy on his shoulders, a mixture of pride and sorrow. That evening, alone in his hotel room, he reviewed the drone footage again, studying the terrain, the lake, the tent that had become a tomb. He thought about the randomness of it all, how a storm, a wrong turn, a decision to hike just a few miles further had sealed their fate. The forensic report, released to the family in early November, provided more details. Jake and Emma had been at the lake for approximately 2 days before the storm hit. Evidence suggested they'd been fishing. Hooks and line were found near the water's edge. They'd built a fire ring, cooked meals, written in a journal that had somehow survived, protected inside a waterproof pouch inside Emma's backpack. The entries were mundane but heartbreaking. Notes about the beauty of the lake, plans for their future, a sketch Emma had drawn of the mountain vista. The final entry was dated August 28, 2008. "Storm moving in fast. Temperature dropping. Jake says we should pack up tomorrow morning. Head back early, I agree. But tonight, we're warm, together and grateful for this place. Whatever comes next, we'll face it side by side." They'd never written another word. The storm had intensified overnight, temperatures plummeting into the 30s. Their tent, designed for summer camping, wasn't adequate for the conditions. Hypothermia had set in while they slept. The medical examiner estimated they'd died within hours of each other. Jake's arm draped over Emma's shoulder, their bodies positioned as if they were simply resting. Nicole requested copies of the journal entries. She read them alone in her bedroom, tears streaming down her face. It was Emma's voice, preserved across 15 years, speaking to her one last time. The sketches, the observations about birds and trees, the love evident in every mention of Jake. These fragments became treasures. Nicole had them framed, hung them in her hallway, a gallery of her sister's final adventure. The case attracted national attention. News outlets from CNN to the New York Times covered the story, focusing on the unusual resolution and the role technology had played. Marcus's channel exploded in popularity. He gained another 1 million subscribers within weeks, but he remained humble, deflecting credit to the search and rescue teams who'd worked the case initially, to the family who'd never given up, to chance itself. In December, Marcus received an unexpected call from the National Association for Search and Rescue. They wanted to partner with him, using drones to review other cold cases where terrain had hindered ground searches. Marcus agreed immediately. He began working with families across the Pacific Northwest, offering his services free of charge, teaching other search teams how to operate drones effectively in wilderness environments. By spring 2024, his efforts had helped locate 3 more missing persons, 2 hikers in Washington and a hunter in Northern California. Not all the outcomes were hopeful. 2 were deceased, victims of falls and exposure. But in each case, families received the closure they desperately needed. Marcus became a quiet advocate for improving search and rescue protocols, testifying before state legislatures about funding and technology gaps. Nicole, meanwhile, channeled her grief into action. She established the Jake and Emma Memorial Fund, raising money for wilderness safety education. She partnered with outdoor recreation groups, hosting workshops on proper gear, weather awareness, and emergency communication devices. Her message was simple. The wilderness is beautiful, but unforgiving. Preparation isn't optional. It's survival. She also became close with Carla, visiting her mother weekly at the care facility. They'd sit together, looking through old photo albums, sharing memories of Emma. Carla's health had deteriorated. The years of not knowing had taken their toll, but the closure brought a visible lightness to her demeanor. She smiled more, laughed at old stories, found peace in knowing her daughter hadn't suffered long and hadn't died alone. One afternoon in May 2024, Nicole and Tyler hiked back to the lake where Jake and Emma had been found. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a way to see the place through their eyes. The trail was grueling, just as Marcus had described, but they persisted. When they reached the shore, they stood in silence, taking in the view, the crystalline water, the towering pines, the snow-capped peaks in the distance. It was, Nicole admitted, breathtakingly beautiful. She understood why Jake and Emma had been drawn here, why they'd risked the extra miles. Tyler knelt by the water's edge and pulled out 2 small stones he'd brought from Jake's favorite beach in Oregon. He placed them carefully on the shore, a marker for his brother. Nicole did the same with a shell from a beach where she and Emma had spent childhood summers. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say that the silence didn't express better. Back in Portland, life continued. Nicole's children grew older, heard the full story of their aunt and the man she'd loved. Emma's youngest niece, now 7, asked why people would go camping if it was dangerous. Nicole explained that life itself was dangerous, but that didn't mean you stopped living. Jake and Emma had died doing something they loved, together, in one of the most beautiful places on Earth. There were worse ways to go. Marcus's video about the case remained online, a digital memorial watched by millions. The comments section became a place where people shared their own stories of loss, of missing loved ones, of the small comforts that closure brings. Some criticized the decision to post the footage, calling it exploitative. But the majority understood what Marcus had accomplished. He'd given a voice to the voiceless, answers to the tormented, and peace to those left behind. In August 2024, on the 16th anniversary of Jake and Emma's disappearance, Nicole organized a small gathering at the trailhead where their car had been found. About 30 people attended, family, friends, former searchers, and Marcus. They planted 2 Douglas fir saplings, one for Jake and one for Emma, with plaques bearing their names and the dates of their 2 short lives. Tyler's daughter helped water the trees, her small hands gripping the hose tightly, taking the task seriously. As the sun set that evening, casting the same golden light that had illuminated the forest 16 years earlier, Nicole felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: gratitude. Not for the tragedy, but for the love Jake and Emma had shared, for the people who'd searched for them, for the stranger with a drone who'd refused to let their story end in mystery. She thought about the journal entry Emma had written, about facing whatever came next, side by side. They'd done exactly that, until the very end. The group dispersed slowly, reluctant to leave. Marcus stayed behind with Nicole, the 2 of them sitting on a fallen log, watching the light fade. "Do you think they knew?" Nicole asked quietly. "At the end, do you think they realized what was happening?" Marcus considered the question. He'd read the forensic reports, studied hypothermia cases, understood the progression. "I think they probably felt tired, cold, and then they fell asleep," he said carefully. "Hypothermia isn't painful in the late stages. It's more like drifting off. And they were together. That had to bring comfort." Nicole nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I used to imagine the worst, that they'd been terrified, suffering, alone. Knowing it wasn't like that. It helps." They sat in silence as darkness crept through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The forest, which had taken Jake and Emma, which had hidden them for 15 years, seemed almost peaceful now. It wasn't malevolent, Nicole realized. It was simply indifferent. Nature didn't care about human plans or hopes or dreams. It operated on its own terms, beautiful and brutal in equal measure. When Nicole finally stood to leave, she paused at the trailhead sign, running her fingers over the wood. Marcus watched her, understanding that this was a goodbye of sorts. Not to Emma, never to Emma, but to the desperate search, the sleepless nights, the unanswered questions that had haunted her for so long. She'd carried that weight for 16 years. Now finally, she could set it down. As they walked back to their cars, Nicole turned to Marcus one last time. "You know what the hardest part is?" she asked. "Learning to live with the fact that some questions don't have satisfying answers. They went camping, made one wrong decision, got caught in bad weather, and died. There's no villain, no conspiracy, no grand meaning, just chance." Marcus understood. So many of his viewers wanted dramatic revelations, shocking twists, evidence of foul play. But most missing persons cases ended like this. Ordinary people meeting extraordinary circumstances. The thin line between adventure and tragedy crossed in a single moment.